Alright, I've avoided this for long enough. Yes, it's finally time to talk about Jiro. Now, to give you some background, my quote-unquote hatred for Jiro has been a running gag here for a while, starting when people would incessantly ask me to play him on stream. Whether I was queuing up for specific missions, trying to learn a certain weapon, recording for a video for an individual character, it didn't matter. Play Jiro was all I ever read. But instead of buckling and playing the big boy, I decided to play into the gag. I'd take cheap shots at him, like locking him in just to get everyone all excited. Oh my god, he's playing Jiro! And then I just cut to the gameplay with a completely different legend. I'd entirely leave him out of tier lists on purpose. You kind of get the idea. But to peel back the curtain a little bit, I actually quite enjoy Jiro. He's got scythe, he's got speed, and to me, that's really all you need. That's a Dr. Seuss book right there. Now, most people say he sucks, and I can understand why. His stats are very underwhelming for the past couple years as meta, and for a long time, his SIGs were too. But you see, that's no longer the case, and it's why he's the most broken character that people don't really play, at least compared to the big two scythes who are far and away the most popular legends in the entire game. I don't think I have to name them, because you probably already know. So what's the deal? What changed? Well, it's actually pretty simple. Jiro has progressively seen some of the most buffs of any modern character in succession, to the point where he's now arguably one of the strongest characters in the game, and has been for a while. No joke. What makes these buffs significant though isn't just the number, because a lot of buffs or nerfs in Brawlhalla are pretty small, and to be honest, I feel like they're a bit of a placebo to a good chunk of the community. You have no idea how many times I see people either dramatically complaining or gloriously celebrating gameplay changes that don't even remotely affect what they're saying they do. Because most of the time, just seeing that X was nerfed or Y was buffed seems enough to appease, even if those changes are designed to only affect a tiny percentage of the player base. But that's besides the point. I only mention that to say that that's not the case with Jiro. Many of his signatures were tweaked in a way that retains the original strengths of the moves while beefing up the downside, so the risk-reward ratio skews much further into the reward side. I think this point is best exemplified by one single move: Sword Side Sig. When Jiro was released, his Sword Side Sig was one of the weakest 10 SIGs in all of Brawlhalla at the time. It had low force, it had high recovery time, high startup, and it killed from the ground, which Sword is already amazing at. In other words, it didn't KO until pretty late, and that late KO was from an already existing threat area. It took a while to come out, and it left you very vulnerable after you used it since you were stuck in place for a brick or two. There was pretty much no point in using it since the risk was just so much higher than the reward granted. It did have a couple perks, a great hitbox with a meaty number of active frames, but otherwise the move was just extremely underwhelming. The other attributes simply weren't good enough to abuse this hitbox, and those active frames ended up dooming you if you missed. But then they changed its recovery time so it's slightly less risky. They ramped up the force so it's significantly more rewarding, and then they cut down on startup so it's much quicker. And this is when the move went from good to great. Because with that startup reduction, you can now string it out of sword downlight with a 1-frame dodge window. That makes it completely unjumpable. Unless the sword downlight hits super weird or drops or something. Sword downlight's super weird like that, but 99% of the time it's completely unjumpable. Meaning it's got its great hitbox, now it has solid frame data, and it has a potential KO in orange if you catch your opponent's dodge. For a weapon like Sword that excels at consistency and reliable KOs for the trade-off that those KOs will be later than some other weapons, to have an option like this that few other legends have, Jala and Thatch are the ones that come to mind after the Bodvar Downsig nerf, it's insane. Hearing this sentence might have sounded crazy just a little while ago, but Jiro has access to one of the most brutal sword strings in the entire game. And I think it's even safe to say not only that, but one of the most brutal KO setups in general. Period. All of Brawlhalla. Part of the reason why this works so well is because that great hitbox was preserved. That's what helps it catch that big bubble around Jiro upon use, and it makes it much easier to reliably connect the string. It's also a much simpler input than someone like Jala, who needs to chase dodge diagonally down and then quickly input up, or quickly release an input to go neutral, but not too fast because then you'll do a recovery, because for Jiro, it's just a standard GC. Of course, if we're comparing, Jalla's has the advantage of KOing off the top, which is generally more reliable, but you tend to pick Jiro and Jalla for very different reasons. So the fact that the speedy ninja boy has a KO string comparable in strength to the barbarian powerhouse is kinda wild. Depending on your positioning and on the map, this can take out an opponent shockingly early. Obviously, the closer you are to the sides, the earlier it'll kill, which means there's some game sense involved, but you'll still find yourself knocking out earlier than expected, even from center stage. On top of that, because it's such a tight window, if you catch your opponent slipping, you can sometimes sneak it in even when their dodge is up, since a lot of people assume you're gonna true combo after the downlight and only bother dodging the next move after. Moves like Jiro Sword Side Sig that have very powerful characteristics like active frames and large hitboxes are a little difficult to balance because they often fall between the axis of make it feel smooth because character should be fun, but don't make it too smooth because then character become oppressive. A more obvious example of this idea is a move like Sidra Sword Ensid. That Octo Tentacle hitbox is so huge, especially for a weapon like Sword. So in order to make it feel fair, that gets compensated, and the move is more sluggish in other areas, like its startup time or recovery time, or how the movement locks you in an animation regardless of your entry momentum. Animations and hitboxes by nature take more time to design and craft than things like startup. So often, and I'm making an assumption here, I could be completely wrong, just keep that in mind, the attacks seem like they'll be designed in coordination with a rough idea of what the frame data will be first, and then smoothed out after based on the space they cover, the archetype of the character, the type of move, and so on. That's why you'll see a slower move like that Octo leg on Sidra, who otherwise has super quick SIGs. But imagine if it reached the same area it does now, but came out twice as fast, or left you stuck for half the time. It'll align itself with the legend Sidra, but it just wouldn't work with everything else in the game. Balance is all about compensation, trading off X so that you can do Y. And in many respects, Jiro Sword Side Sig had too much trade-off. Despite being big hitboxed and long animated, everything else, especially its force, was very lackluster. Nowadays, that pendulum has swung generously far in the reverse. Those compensations were reduced, so now you've got a very overcharged move on your hands, and it's kind of crazy. And keep in mind, those kinds of changes were applied to many of his signatures, none as impactful as the Sword Side Sig, probably not even close, but you'll frequently see Jiro Sigs killing an orange to light red, and that's quite terrifying for a speedy average strength archetype. Now, you might come out of this commentary thinking a number of things, that I have a huge issue with this, and I'm making this video to call attention to BMG, and Jiro needs to be changed ASAP, because this is so broken, or that, you know, it's finally time. Jiro got some penance because he's been underwhelming for so long, thank you for calling attention to it, but if I'm gonna be honest, it's none of those. I just find it interesting to talk about. Part of the experience of playing an actively developed game is the ups and the downs of the meta-altering balance changes, and this is one I just felt like discussing amongst many throughout the years I've been playing, and it's in big part because I've got that personal connection to our Jiro boy. I think having unique options like the downlight side sig is pretty awesome, and I definitely wouldn't want that taken away. Maybe a force reduction's in order, but that's not my call, nor really should it be. Jiro's just a cool case. Because he's been overlooked for such a long time, I feel like there's still some residuals of that today, even when it doesn't quite match up to his present strength. Ultimately though, he's still the same character. Jiro's still Jiro. He's got the high speed scythe, probably the best stat you could possibly have on that weapon, and like any low defense legend, picking him up is still a bit of a risk. Something I didn't even mention, since my focus was primarily about how Jiro went from very underpicked to very underrated, is that Jiro has always had some quirks that make him very special. Scythe Downsig is a great example. It's an incredible ledge strapping tool that allows you to threaten that area with almost double the range of any other scythe legend. And despite Dex not being in meta in most scenarios, Jiro's actually a rare case where his unusual stat spread can assist in generating new combos like Scythe Nair Sayers. If you're a diehard Jiro supporter like many in my chat appear to be, then I think most of this probably isn't news to you. But to those of you that aren't, maybe try giving Brawlhalla's resident punch-and bag a chance, because I think you'll quickly see that he's far beyond the shadow he once was. Get it? Because he uses shadow clones. Like shadow. Bye.